Welcome, everybody, to the Cover 2 podcast. I am Nick Nenad.
And I'm Jared Smith.
And today we have another big show for you guys. Today we will be diving in once again to some more roster lookouts in the NFL. We're going to only be doing one division today, the NFC West. And the reason we're only doing one division is because every single one of these teams has a chance to make the playoffs. And every single one of these teams deserves to have their entire roster explained and looked over, and especially after free agency and some of the trades these teams made, we're going to get into deep onto those teams. And of course, and then we're going to start the podcast by going over the NBA trade deadline and looking at, some of the top teams in the NBA and kind of almost like doing a little mini preview for the playoffs and the NBA finals after all these moves, who we think are the real top contenders now and who we think might have fallen back and lost in a way after this big trade deadline buyout season. So we will get to that to start. Jared, it was an interesting trade deadline because there was a lot more big moves than usual on this NBA trade deadline that I feel like we've had the last couple years. We have guys like Vucevic getting traded. One of the best players in the NBA, a perennial NBA All-Star. We have Aaron Gordon being traded to a top contender. We have
Orlando just getting depleted.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're going into complete rebuild mode around a couple of their young players. But, they had some top guys they wanted to get rid of, and they go. And then we have big buyouts, Andre Drummond, LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin. All these guys, I know all of them may not have happened right on the trade deadline, but we're going to talk about all of them and then more and more trades. So, Jared, what do you want to start with today? Again, we're not going to be going through, the lower ranked teams. We're really going to be talking about probably the top 8-9 teams in the NBA here, because we think those are realistically the only teams that have a legitimate shot at the NBA finals, especially without this bubble year, right? Like we had last year. It's more of a legitimate season, and we're not going to get into, Chicago's roster. We're going to talk about Vucevic, but we're not going to get into those kind of things. So, Jared, what do you want to talk about to start with this podcast?
I think we have to start with the Nets. Right?
Yeah.
Because the Nets are like the most super team I think we've ever seen before, with the likes of Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, right? And then in two buyout situations, they get Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge. Now, Aldridge just coming into the team, so I don't believe he's even played for them yet. But we've seen Blake Griffin have somewhat of a resurgence a little bit, right? And I think he hadn't made a dunk in a regular season game in over 300 days or something like that. His entire time with the Pistons, he didn't dunk the ball once, right? Now, obviously, he doesn't have the legs or the hops that he used to in his early days with the Clippers and Lob City and all that. But so far, I think he has 3 or 4 lobs already with the Nets, right? So, I think he's rejuvenated. I think he is happy to be in Brooklyn. I don't think he was happy to be with the Pistons, and that's why they were able to mutually have a buyout. But to me, when I look at this Brooklyn team, I see them loading up not for the East, but loading up to face the Lakers if it's the Lakers that they're playing in the finals. I think they're saying we can handle the East, even though Philadelphia is sitting as the number 1 seed. Right now, Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken, is sitting at number 2. But they're saying, all right, we know that we can get past most teams in the East. The Sixers are probably, the team that has the best chance to defeat Brooklyn. But they're basically saying we want size, we want length, because the Lakers have obviously LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and then the Lakers get Andre Drummond in a buyout, right? So they have their own size and their own mismatch problems that they pose to other teams. So that is the first thing that comes to my mind is Brooklyn is just loading up, because before Blake Griffin, before LaMarcus Aldridge, I would say they were actually a pretty small team. You had Kevin Durant playing the 4, which in today's basketball is more realistic because of just how quick, how up and down the game is played. You had DeAndre Jordan as a true center, but in reality, he's in there to get rebounds, play defense, block shots. He's not there to score. You have 3 legitimate scorers already. So the fact that they got bigger with size and the additions of Griffin and Aldridge, I think that is just simply saying we're getting ready for the finals. We don't care about the East. We're getting ready for the finals and to face the Lakers.
Well, I'll say this too. When you look at the Nets, and when you looked at them before these moves too, realistically, we were looking at them as most likely an Eastern Conference team at least. And obviously these moves to add this depth to add this depth, makes them a legitimate finals contender. And I think the only thing, and this is a legitimate thing, the only thing that can stop this team is health at this point right now from really making a run at winning an NBA championship. Because when you look at a lot of the guys on this team, Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, injury issues over the last couple of years. Griffin always in his career. Kyrie, Kevin Durant, a lot of injury issues. James Harden, not so much, but his clutch gene in the playoffs is not something to write about. So there is something that can stop this team, but Jared, it's going to be a lot, right? And they still have Joe Harris. They still have a lot of guys I didn't even mention, DeAndre Jordan, right, on this roster. This team is stacked. And again, the only thing that can hurt them is health. But yeah, after these moves, the Nets are in prime position to be the Eastern Conference champions. Now, Jared, when you look at the Nets too, and I'll ask this about certain West teams, the number one seed, like you mentioned, is Philadelphia. Why didn't Philadelphia make any moves? Now, obviously their roster is stacked as well. Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, the top three on this team. But in your opinion, do you think they should have added more? Or do you think the way Doc Rivers has this team playing, they just think, you know what, it's probably going to be us and the Nets, and we think we gel with the Nets well, so we're going for it?
Well, listen, the Sixers did add George Hill, right? And that's not big signing splash. That's not oh my gosh, this is going to get us over the hump type player. But George Hill is a seasoned veteran, right? Been to the playoffs multiple times with the Pistons. Pacers. Can't even talk today. The Pacers, and I believe with the Bucks as well, right? So I think he's a veteran guy that can come off the bench. You know what he's going to get from him. He's going to give you tough minutes, and he can be a guy that can give you some points, whether it's 6, 8, 10 points off of the bench. Once Joel Embiid comes back for the Sixers, the fact that they have maintained that first place lead without Joel Embiid, to me, shows that the Sixers didn't need to go out and give up a bunch of assets to get another superstar, right? To get a Vucevic or an Aaron Gordon. They're saying, hey, we can win, in a short period of time without Joel Embiid, and we can basically wait for him to come back healthy. It's not like they're having to say, oh man, hey, we're in a 5-6 game slide. We kind of need to rush Joel Embiid back a little bit to make sure that we stay in that number one seed. They're cruising right now, right? You're seeing Ben Simmons play extremely well, basically being the point guard leading this team. You're seeing Seth Curry and Danny Green shooting lights out from three. And then Tobias Harris, who was snubbed as an all-star, I think he's literally used that as fuel, saying, I should be an all-star. I think it was like last week or the week before, he made kind of like a game-winning shot in a last-second situation, and he ran down the court, and he's like, I'm an all-star, right? Kind of like proving, hey, I've got this chip on my shoulder. I didn't get voted in, but I know in my heart of hearts that I'm an all-star, right? So with the lineup of Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, Danny Green, Seth Curry, and Ben Simmons, that's a pretty lethal lineup, right? Now, those aren't the box office names that Brooklyn has, but I think this team has a lot of continuity. And plus with Doc Rivers as your head coach, Philadelphia 76ers, they're a team to me that, like I said, is probably the one true contender that can go up against Brooklyn. I think some people might throw in Milwaukee, but Giannis is hurt right now. And other than Giannis, man, like who do you really trust on Milwaukee that can step up and go up against a three-headed monster like the Brooklyn Nets? I think Philadelphia has positioned themselves talent-wise the best to go up against Brooklyn. So I like them as long as they can sustain that first-place lead and let Joel Embiid come back as healthy and as close to 100% as he can be.
Yeah, no, and again, like that's with these teams, I get your point. They didn't really need to add somebody because they have Embiid coming back. But my thing is that this Nets team is so stacked. They do add George Hill, like you mentioned, which will be nice. And George Hill is used to playing against the Eastern Conference and stuff like that, and has been in the playoffs, deep runs with the Bucks lately. But I just feel like maybe they needed to do another move. I don't even know what that is, but they need to make a move. At least Milwaukee went out and added PJ Tucker. They just signed Jeff Teague.
That was big.
Yeah, they just added Jeff Teague too, who has familiarity with the team. Didn't fit well at all in Boston. Really didn't get minutes. But so, I see Milwaukee as like, okay, well, at least they went for it, right? And Philadelphia, yeah, you're resting on your laurels of Ben Simmons, who hasn't been the most clutch in his NBA career. Embiid's having an MVP year, and he may be that guy that can put them in the finals realistically. He's that damn good. And then you look at Doc Rivers, who, again, besides the Celtics, really did not do well with the Clippers when he would have deep runs. And when you look at his roster last year, this is the only other roster that rivaled it, and he couldn't get past the second round of the Denver Nuggets last year. So
hey, listen,
yeah,
I didn't want to bring that up. I was gonna wait for you to potentially say something. I didn't think you would either, but I'm proud of you for bringing up the fact that your Clippers last year and Doc Rivers choked. That's really big of you. I was surprised. I wasn't gonna shame you. I shamed you enough last year, so I was gonna let it slide. But the fact that you bring it up, I mean, go ahead, let's talk about it for a minute.
Well, no, let's talk about it because I hey, if you don't remember what I said in in those
Oh, I remember.
middle of the pandemic podcast, I said that I thought this would be the end of Doc Rivers once that happened, because as a fan of that team, and as a fan of Doc, I was like, this is just unacceptable. Now I get there was pandemic related issues with the team, and there was guys that didn't show up and weren't fit for the playoffs. But again, Doc Rivers, again, besides having a super team in the Celtics that had a lot of, dogs on that team, guys that really played tough. Rivers has had success, but not as much success as other coaches. And I just think that when you're going up against this wagon of a team in the Nets, I think they needed a little bit more. And that's why I at least like that the Bucks made a move. Now, do I think the 76ers are the best 76ers team they've been since the old restart years? I forget what their slogan was. What was their slogan back in the day when they were really, really bad? They were one of the worst teams in the league, and they had that slogan like, not suck for luck, because obviously that's the Colts, but like, what was their slogan back in the day?
I'm drawing a blank, man.
I know I'm drawing, but
it's for luck. I don't even remember that.
Essentially it was like the 76ers were tanking and then rebuilding completely. And in a couple years,
listen, it was like a 10, 11-year rebuild. Okay, so it's one thing to rebuild for 3 or 4 years. When you get enough first-round draft picks, you would think that you would hit on at least 2 or 3 of those. But the Sixers couldn't even hit on that, right? Yeah. They were so bad for so long that it was like, okay, at a certain point, this is now your scouting department. This is now your organization that just simply can't draft well. So it's one thing to tank, but there has to be a plan and a part of the process. And the Sixers were basically just taking these guys and just taking flyers, and it just wasn't working out, right? I think they lucked out on Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. So, for the first 8 to 9 years of their quote unquote tanking, the organization was the one doing the tanking. It wasn't the players.
Yeah, well, and what I'm trying to get at is like, this is the best 76ers team we've seen since the years of I don't know, Allen Iverson. Realistically, them in the finals against the Lakers. Like, this is the best roster of players. I know they had Jimmy Butler the one year and they had Tobias Harris, but it didn't gel right, and the rest of their roster wasn't good besides those guys. They had Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid. Seth Curry is playing the best of his career. Danny Green is playing better than last year than he did even with the championship Lakers. And then on the bench, they now have George Hill. They have Shake Milton, Matthias Thibault, defensive specialist, and Dwight Howard. Like, this is a stacked team. So, like, what happens after this year if they can't get past the Nets? Because I think it's one of those things where, like, a lot of these teams, they go, you know what? This team, the Nets, is so good. It's like the Warriors, right? Like, you didn't feel bad about losing to the Warriors those years because you were like, whatever, this team's stacked. But I think it's a little bit worse for the Bucks and 76ers because these are the best teams that they've had. And unfortunately, there's a team that has like 6 or 7 All-Stars on it. And it's just like, I'm so interested to see in the playoffs, what happens to these teams. Do the Nets just run through them, or do we have like these 6-7 game series that show these teams have grit, and essentially they battle it out for 2-3 more years, right? It's going to be really, really interesting in the East, at least with the top teams.
No doubt, 1,000%. And listen, you said a couple of times in that segment, these super teams and 5, 6, 7 All-Stars all on one team, whether it was guys that were drafted by the team, or traded, or buyout situations where a team was able to just take on a player's salary. Listen, the thing that comes to my mind, and we've talked about this before on this show, we talked about it with the Golden State Warriors super team when Kevin Durant went and decided to join there. We've talked about it a little bit with LeBron James when he decided to go to Miami and pair with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. But I feel like I have to bring it up again because this Brooklyn Nets team, even though constructed a little bit differently, resembles those same types of things. And what I always go back to is the 2011 Lakers, when Chris Paul was supposed to be traded there.
Yes. Yeah.
And the NBA, specifically David Stern, who was the commissioner at that time, nixed that trade. Now, at the time, the Hornets, who were the Hornets at the time, they no longer are, they're the Pelicans, they did not have like a true owner. And so the NBA, in a sense, had like part control over what that organization did. And David Stern had a say in that trade and basically said, I'm not giving up Chris Paul for peanuts. The Lakers, in today's world, what they were going to give back in order to get Chris Paul was essentially not enough, right? So David Stern nixed that. My question to you is, like, should the NBA have the ability to step in and say, okay, like, you guys have enough all-stars on your team, whether it's all-stars that are currently in their prime, or if we're talking about guys like Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge, who may be a little bit past their prime, but obviously can still play and can still contribute to a team, right? As a Lakers fan, I always go back to what if Chris Paul got traded to the Lakers, right? And the fact that the NBA nixed it there, like, do you think the NBA should have some type of control where they say, okay, like, at some point, we need some type of parity in the league? Because when we look at Brooklyn right now, you're right. They have to get Kevin Durant back. Kyrie Irving has to be available because we've seen how wild and crazy he can get, and the fact that he just leaves the team for a week and no one knows where he goes. But let's just say, for all purposes aside, that the Brooklyn Nets have their full roster and they are at full strength. Like, the way that they have constructed their team, is it right for them to have that many all-stars, that many great players on a team, or should there be more parity in the league?
There 100% should be more parity in the league. And the NBA is what I saw from this trade deadline in the last, I'd say, 2 weeks of signings and all that stuff has been a little ridiculous. And the NBA needs to step in and do something. And Jared, I don't even know what that is you do, because I don't like what they did with Chris Paul and Kobe back in the day. I don't like that the owner could just pick what teams essentially he wants to succeed, right? So I don't know what you necessarily do. I think maybe lower the cap, make it like the NFL, where like the cap doesn't really reflect how much money the league makes, right? You make it more even so that, like, if you want to stack your team with a super team, you can't have all these assets right after that. But again, Blake Griffin could just take the minimum and go, like that's the way it is. And maybe they do it like the NFL, Jared, like where they say you can't go over the cap. Can't go over it. So if you don't have enough money to sign a minimum player, you don't get that guy. Like, there's a certain cap and you're more stiff with it. Because I think the problem with the NBA now is the cap is real loosey-goosey. Like, realistically, you could be $1 under the cap, but still sign like 4 guys because they're all veteran minimum contracts. So I think what the NBA realistically should do is control the salary cap a little bit more, because I think that would make it so less of these super teams could happen. Now, yeah, superstars could take less money. They could be paid $20 million a year to have, and at that point, you can't do anything about it because if players are going to sacrifice money at that, whatever, right? But yeah, no, the NBA does need to do something because it is getting a little ridiculous. It's hard to watch the NBA during the regular season. It's even harder when there's no fans in the stands. And, I essentially look for the playoffs. And Jared, how many times have we talked about the NBA since the season started? Once or twice, maybe 3 times, right? And there's a reason to that, because we essentially just wait to see who has the most stacked team, and then we talk about them. It's not parity like the NFL. It's not parity like Major League Baseball, although Major League Baseball has gone a little over the top too, but we'll get into that probably in like a week. But so yeah, I just think there does need to be roster control, and I think the only way you do it is maybe really being a lot more strict with the salary cap, because the Nets would not have been able to sign LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin if the salary cap was better controlled. That's all I'll say. But as far as teams trading for guys and stuff, you can't really do anything about that. And that's why I hate the Chris Paul stuff from back in the day, because I think we'd be talking a different GOAT conversation with Kobe Bryant if Chris Paul had joined Kobe. I think we'd be talking about Kobe having 6 or 7 championships at this point. But the NBA didn't allow that, so now Kevin Durant might have 5 or 6 cheap ones, right? So, I salary cap, that's my only fix for it right now.
Yeah, no, that's true. And also, listen, I wasn't trying to just specifically talk about the Brooklyn Nets, because obviously the Lakers, who we mentioned for a quick second, they also just signed Andre
Yeah.
Drummond, who was bought out by the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? And so this is also on the players too. I'm not just trying to sit here and say this is all the owners and this is all the league and it's all their fault, right? Obviously, these players, especially the likes of Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Andre Drummond, those guys are in the, past their primes. They've already made a bunch of money. For them, this isn't about going to find the maximum amount of dollars that they can get. This is about winning a championship. Blake Griffin's never won a championship. Marcus Aldridge has never won a championship, right? And Andre Drummond has never won a championship either. So I think these guys, at the points in their career, they're trying to say, okay, where can I go that is going to give me the best chance to win right now, right? Andre Drummond, in his first press conference since officially signing with the Lakers, literally said, I'm here for one reason. That is to win, right? So he is there to do whatever is needed in order to help out, whether that he doesn't need to be the primary scorer when LeBron James and Anthony Davis comes back. He can strictly focus on defense, rebounding, and being another big, because I think that's something that the Lakers currently lack. I think they have good depth at their guard and small forward spots, but the fact that LeBron James and Anthony Davis aren't there right now, I think we are seeing the lack of depth that the Lakers have in their size, right? They lost Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee in the offseason, who were two kind of big anchors for them that led them to the finals and eventually to the championship last year. So bringing Andre Drummond is huge for them. But like I said, it's also on the player and saying, all right, these are the 3 teams I'm going to. The other 27 in the league, don't even call me. I don't care how much money you offer me. It's not worth my time, right? I've already made my millions in contracts and endorsements. I'm about winning. So it is both ways. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't, completely singling out the Brooklyn Nets, because obviously the Lakers and some other teams have been able to get some veterans on those buyout deals to basically stockpile their teams.
Well, and here's the thing about the Lakers. They needed Drummond. The Nets didn't need Aldridge and Griffin. You know what I'm saying? And there's a difference here, because I actually don't blame the players. I blame superstars more than I blame, fringe all-stars. Yeah, exactly. Well, LeBron James, like that. I mean, realistically, that's the guy that ruined all this, to be honest, like 10 years ago. But when you look back in history, Jared, Charles Barkley, at the end of his career, went to multiple teams, tried to win championships, right? Karl Malone, Gary Payton, they joined up with Kobe and Shaq, tried to win a championship. They didn't. But so this was happening with the OGs, the guys that, talk trash on the guys now. They did the same thing. I don't blame a guy like Andre Drummond, who's been on some of the worst NBA teams his whole career, that
Pistons, Cleveland.
I said Cleveland. Oh, just really, really bad, right? And his stats, he was a guy, right? I didn't blame Kevin Love for going to Cleveland or getting traded to Cleveland or whatever, because he had been on the Minnesota Timberwolves, terrible teams for a long time, right? And so in the NBA and in sports in general, that's okay. It's James Harden getting traded to the Nets. It's the 3 guys piling up on one team. It's Kevin Durant joining the Warriors right back in the day. I blame more the superstars than the individual players like Blake and Aldridge and Drummond, who just want to win a championship. Now, Griffin, he's had his chances, and he's actually been part of some teams losing realistically with his play on the court. But, Aldridge, he's been in the thick of things. He's almost won championships before. And they're at the end of their careers, right? And so I'm not going to blame Drummond for signing with the Lakers. The Lakers needed Andre Drummond. They have no center. They need Andre Drummond. They have 2 players that are hurt right now. And from a lot of different sources, like, we don't know if LeBron and AD are going to come back the exact same this season. They might kind of be beat up the rest of the season with their specific injuries. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Lakers. And we're going to get to the Western Conference deals in a second. But I do disagree with you. It's not necessarily all NBA players. It's the superstars that are causing these issues. Because this has been happening since the 90s and the early 2000s with some of the guys that talk trash now. Shaq. How many times did Shaq switch teams? And he's talking trash on guys switching. It's like, come on, guys. At some point, we're not going to blame the fringe old guys that can barely play the game anymore. We're going to blame Kevin Durant and LeBron and AD and these guys that sit out and just don't want to play for their teams anymore and are superstars. So, yeah. But so speaking of the Lakers, I think Drummond, this is such a big signing. If AD and LeBron are back, the Lakers are still like primed for most likely a finals run, right? Yeah, the Nuggets got better. The Jazz are a really, really good team. And the Clippers, during the regular season, have had the Lakers number a lot. And so you look at that, and maybe in the playoff matchup, the Clippers aren't the Clippers, but Jared, they're the Clippers. I've been a fan of them, since the mid 2000s, and it's just been a lot of heartbreak and bad years. So I'm holding my breath on that team. They add Rajon Rondo. They give up Lou Williams, who now I have a wasted jersey back there. I can't even hang it up anymore, right? So this team is just messing with my emotions, right? They add Rondo. They at least do something, but it's going to be interesting. But as far as Drummond to the Lakers goes, I love him signing with that team, and I really think he's going to flourish, and I can't wait to see the whole team together.
So thank you for once again bringing up your Clippers, because I was actually, like I said, going to steer away. We were going to talk about the Lakers. We were going to go into the Nuggets and the Jazz. But, I mean, I will never, ever pass up an opportunity to talk some smack on the Clippers. So, listen, this trade to me, I simply don't understand. I really don't. Like, if you were telling me that the Clippers were, like, getting some type of draft compensation or they were getting a starting caliber player, I can understand trading away Lou Williams. Lou Williams is a perennial sixth man of the year type of dude, right? I mean, he is an instant bucket, whether he starts or comes off the bench. It does not matter, right? I don't care if they're up by 50 or down by 50, what the situation is. Lou Williams can get you a bucket. Rajon Rondo, wow, playoff Rondo, right? That's his nickname. He obviously did that with the Lakers last year. His veteran leadership, obviously winning, championships in his a championship in his early days with the Boston Celtics. I get it. He's got that actual championship pedigree. But you're telling me that you would rather have Rajon Rondo, who can't shoot from the outside and is a horrible free throw shooter as well. Like, you're just going to you're bringing in Rajon Rondo for veteran leadership, right? Like, in the locker room, and his defensive prowess over the likes of Lou Williams, who, like I said, can be the sixth man coming off your bench and get you a bucket anytime you want. Like, the fact that this was just a straight up player for player trade, like, I'm pretty sure when I saw that on Twitter, I tweeted it to you and I just laughed, like a bunch of laughs. I'm stunned. I mean, please tell me, from a Clippers fan perspective, like, you can't be happy about this. You're giving up Lou Williams for Rajon Rondo? You can't be happy.
Jared, it's desperate. It's desperate. They see all the other teams getting better, and they make a desperate move.
This doesn't make them better. This makes them worse.
Okay, well, let me just say something. Let me try to explain this, because obviously I think I watch a lot more Clippers games than a lot of people that talk trash from the Clippers, okay? So, I follow this team pretty intently. Like I said, I don't watch a lot of regular season basketball in general. I will watch the big games, right? But, I have social media. I have my news feeds. I know what goes on with this team, right? I know what goes on with the Lakers. I follow them too. And I think the only way I can explain this, number one, I think it's a desperate move. I think they saw how well Rondo played in the playoffs last year. I think they see how terrible Paul George plays in the playoffs, how bad Kawhi was in a couple games, and how inconsistent a guy like Marcus Morris was, and Patrick Beverley, that they needed a playoff guy, right? And playoff Rondo is playoff Rondo. You have a negative and a positive, and you combine it. So you have playoff Rondo and playoff PG-13, and it evens out. So where it's not as bad, and you don't end up scoring 7 points in a game 7 or whatever it was, right? Besides it being a desperate move, I think there's two moves the Clippers did that had to do with last year's debacle. One, Montrezl Harrell not getting re-signed. They picked Marcus Morris over Montrezl Harrell.
Thank you for that.
Because Harrell did not perform well in the playoffs. I know he was going on with personal issues, but he was not there for the team in the end. And a guy that was supposed to match up and be that difference maker, be that fourth man, that fourth star on the team, maybe even fifth star with Marcus Morris on the team. Harrell was terrible and really only played well in Game 7 of that terrible Game 7 last year against the Nuggets. Lou Williams. We all know what happened with Lou Williams. He not only let the Clippers down, he let the whole NBA down with the stupid decision of, yes, I know you're picking up dinner, but you went to a strip club in the middle of the pandemic.
Magic City.
Yeah. Oh, and then who he get traded to, Jared? He gets traded to Atlanta, right?
Hey,
Crazy.
listen,
Right.
Lou Williams is about to be in Magic City eating wings every week. Lou Williams is actually probably happy because he knows he's not winning a championship with the Clippers. So he's like, listen, if I'm not going to win a championship with the Clippers, I might as well get traded to Atlanta where I can at least go to the strip club and get some wings once a week. I mean, Lou Williams actually made out in this trade.
Yeah, he probably made out in a bunch of other ways. But Lou Williams, they should, the Atlanta Hawks should have Magic City as their logo on their jersey at this point.
Should be their sponsor.
Yeah. Free wings for all the people in the stands every time Lou scores 20 points.
They give up less than 100 points, free wings.
Exactly. But so I think when you look at these deals, I think the Clippers are trying to stray away from those guys that failed them last year. And Lou has not had the best year this year. He had a very bad, a bubble. And so did Harold. And I think they just want to move on. And then putting in Rondo for Beverly. Beverly has underperformed in big games. He's underperformed against top players, even though he talks a lot of trash. He does perform well sometimes, but it's not consistent. So it's a desperate move. But I think they have trust in young Terrence Mann. They like Luke Kennard. Nicholas Batum has had a little bit of a resurgence in his career. So, they still have depth on this team again, Jared. Man, they have Marcus Morris as a solid, third man on this team at this point, right? They have Serge Ibaka, who's hurt right now, but he's a solid playoff player, right? Patrick Beverly, like I just mentioned, the bench, and they still have Reggie Jackson as a point guard potentially too, with now the addition of Rondo. So, do I think this team is in the upper echelon of possibly winning a championship? No, but if everything goes right, this team is still an amazing team with one of the best players in the league in Kawhi Leonard and top guys like Paul George, Marcus Morris, and if playoff Rajon Rondo comes around, this team could make a run. But the problem is this isn't like last year where all they really had to do was compete with the Lakers, who they matched up really well against. They now have a better Nuggets team and a better Jazz team. So I'd rather focus on those two teams than the Clippers, who I think are the fourth best team in the West right now. And maybe fifth best.
That entire discussion that you just said sounded desperate. Like you were taking on the mantra of the Clippers right now in talking desperation, because I'm sorry right now, but Patrick Beverly is younger than Rajon Rondo, right? He came into the league as a scrappy, feisty guy who didn't take any mess from anyone. And as he has gotten longer into his career, he's become a better three-point shooter, right? So I think in all areas, other than the veteran experience of winning a championship, I think he is the guy that you want on the floor over Rajon Rondo, right? Paul George, known as a defensive player. We know the offensive guy that he can be. He doesn't bring it on every single night, but I would say that Paul George is a better defender than Rajon Rondo. Here's my thing. When I'm looking at their roster, which I'm looking at right now, Patrick Beverly, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Marcus Morris, and Serge Ibaka as their starting five. When you look at their bench, right, I see Luke Kennard, Nicholas Batum, Reggie Jackson, right? You take away the likes of Lou Williams and you add Rajon Rondo. To me, with that second unit, which is where Rajon Rondo is more than likely going to be playing most of the time, how does Rajon Rondo really help you in the all-around game? Like I said, I think from a locker room leadership, he's a guy that it doesn't matter if it's a game day or an off day. He's always got his iPad in his hands, looking at film. Like he's a great locker room type of guy. I just don't know how he helps this team, who has been struggling more so offensively than anything, in that category. Because you've got Kawhi Leonard, right, who's the claw, who has been the NBA Defensive Player of the Year before. Paul George, who's known as a defender. Patrick Beverly, who's known as a defender. Like they have guys that can potentially lock other teams' best players up. Like they don't necessarily need a Rajon Rondo for that. And I don't see Rajon Rondo helping on the offensive side at all. So in my opinion, I don't see how he fits on this team on the court. So to me, I don't know, man. Like I get what you're saying and I hear what you're saying. I just think the fact that you give up the sixth man of the year type player in Lou Williams, that basically solidifies the Clippers as definitely not making it past the second round. I mean, they were going to anyway, because that's just what they do. But to me, with Rajon Rondo, it's not going to happen. Unless you expect Rajon Rondo to get you 10 to 15 points a game, which I don't think you can automatically expect. I don't see the Clippers getting past second round.
Let's just say this, Jared. With these type of moves, right? If I was making these moves on 2K, I'm not
that trade wouldn't have gone through on 2K. Lou Williams,
Rajon
Rondo would not have gone down on 2K. I'm telling
Well,
you.
and Jerry, we gave up 2 second-round picks. We even gave up picks. It was such an unrealistic trade. But I just think they're trying everything they can. They're trying to make the most playoff-worthy team when, Kawhi clearly hasn't gelled well with this team so far. Paul George has been Paul George, right? Doesn't come up in the big moments. Beverly hasn't played the best the last couple of years. He's been very injured. Marcus Morris has played well, right? I'm not going to, talk on him. And Ibaka really hasn't done anything wrong. Zubac has regressed a bit. And again, they have a team, a very good, solid defensive bench in Batum and Kennard and Terrence Mann, right? So it's desperate. But again, if it all goes perfect, I could still see them being one of the better teams. Are they beating the Brooklyn Nets? Probably not. Probably not. But Kawhi won it with the Raptors. You never know. Here's
the problem. Here's the problem because we have to move on.
Yeah,
the fact that you said if it all goes perfect, like it has to go perfect for the Clippers just to get out of the second round, right? Like the Lakers. They'll get out of the second round.
They'll get out of the second round.
Can we get a guarantee on the Cover 2 podcast that the Clippers, 2021 Los Angeles Clippers, are going to make it out of the second round?
Let me just check one thing real quick.
Because while you're checking, I'm going to say something. If the Clippers do not make it out of the second round, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, those trades and or acquisitions bust.
Oh,
you can solidify it as a bust. I'm sorry.
Jay, I'll say this.
They're still great players. It's a bust if the Clippers do not make it out of the second round and do not at least make it to the NBA Finals. They have to make it to the finals in order for those trades to be legitimate. If not, I'm sorry to say it, but those were simply busts.
I agree that if they don't get to the finals, yes, those deals are bust. I will say this right now, the Clippers will get to the Western Conference Finals. Because as of right now, they are either going to play most likely the Nuggets and Trailblazers in the first and second round. And I think they're most likely going to play the Nuggets or Trailblazers in the first round. That's tough, but those teams are winnable, right? And with the history of last year, I could see the Clippers really wanting to beat the Nuggets. And in the second round, they might get lucky and play the Suns. And I think they will get past the Suns. So
a lot of hoping and wishing.
Yeah, and I think the best thing to happen to the Clippers, right, Jared, is these Lakers injuries, right? The Lakers, with Drummond and Kuzma, they might fall down those rankings a little bit, end up being a 4th, 5th seed coming to the playoffs. The Clippers then avoid them. But I'm just saying, you don't want to play the Lakers and the Jazz. That's all I'm saying. You play the Lakers and Jazz, I think you're losing. I think with the history with the Nuggets, they can match up well with them. And they can beat the Trailblazers, and they can beat the Suns. And they can get through the 2 rounds. I'm just saying.
Suns are number 2 seed right now. Suns are looking good.
They're looking good, but they're not better than the Clippers. And I'll say that every single day. They're not better than the Clippers. Okay, so Jared, when you look at the Nuggets and the Jazz, the Nuggets now add Aaron Gordon, right? They already have Jokic. They already have Jamal Murray, and they have a lot of depth, right? Then you look at the Jazz. Their roster is filled with guys. Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, Gobert, Ingles, Bogdanovich. When this team's healthy, it's one of the best rosters in the NBA.
Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's a team 8-9 deep, right? Who do you think, because the Jazz didn't make a move here. They didn't make any move.
None.
Who do you think is the better team out of those 2 teams right now? And don't look at the standings, because obviously the standings have the Nuggets, 6.5 games behind the Jazz. Who do you think has the better chance of making a deep run, the Nuggets or the Jazz?
Listen, I really like what the Nuggets did, right? I think they brought on in bringing in JaVale McGee and Aaron Gordon. It gives them a lot of size, and I think it's also one of those same things, right? The Nuggets know they're going to be between that 4 and 6 seed, and they're more than likely not going to crack anything above number 4, realistically, right? I think the Nuggets are preparing for when the playoffs start. They need more size. They need more big men. They need more strength to go up against the likes of the Lakers or other teams that can pose big threats, right, as far as power forwards and centers and dominating in the low post. So I think that's really why they got Aaron Gordon and JaVale McGee. But to me, it's the Jazz, and for this one and simple reason, the cohesiveness, right? Yes, they didn't make any trades or acquire anyone, but they also didn't lose anyone. This team has been together for the entire year and for also most of last year as well. right? So to me, it's the fact that this team has stayed relatively healthy. They were in a little bit of a skid. I believe they lost 5 out of the last like 6 games or something like that. But I think they'll rebound. I think every team, no matter how good you are at some point in the season, goes through a little bit of a skid. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. But to me, it's the cohesiveness of this team and the fact that they all know each other, right? Aaron Gordon and JaVale McGee still are going to have to come and try to figure out their roles, right? Now, I'm sure they will pick it up with whether it's a few weeks or, a few games, but it's still going to take some time for those guys to kind of cement themselves on the court with this new team. The Utah Jazz, they know who they're rolling with from day one. They can go on the court right now against any team, whether it's the Lakers or the Brooklyn Nets, and they think they're winning, right? I think the Utah Jazz have probably the most confidence out of almost any team in the league, even the Lakers and the Nets, who I just mentioned. So to me, it's the Jazz, like I said, because they didn't lose anyone and because of the familiarity that they have with each other.
That makes sense too, and I think the biggest thing, we talk about like with these super teams, right? The one thing that could derail them a little bit is obviously injuries, but the non-cohesiveness, right? And you look at what we just talked about the Clippers, right? They threw a lot of different guys at a roster, a lot of different personalities, and so far it hasn't worked out. The Jazz, they bring in a simple-minded guy like Mike Conley, right? He has one role. I'm going to be the point guard, right? I don't care about scoring 30, 40 points. I'm going to be the point guard. I'm going to let Donovan Mitchell do his thing. I'm going to give the ball to Gobert, right? Then I'm going to toss the ball in the corner to Ingles, and I got a guy like Bogdanovich to throw to too. Like, this is a great cohesive team that now has played, a full season, a bubble, and and now another full season with each other, right? And remember, guys, the Jazz were a rimmed ball away from potentially playing the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, because I believe the Jazz most likely would have beat the Clippers as well with the way the Clippers played in last year's playoffs. And you never know, maybe even the finals, right? So this is a really, really good team. Yes, they got eliminated in the first round last year, but it was by the smallest hair of refraction possible, right? And so, I have to agree with you. I think the Jazz are the better team right now. This is not a knock on the Nuggets. Again, they're not going to play each other in the first round, which is a good thing this year, because I think this is more of a second round, third round matchup this year, the way I want to see it. But I really love Aaron Gordon being added to this team. And I think that the Nuggets definitely put themselves above, possibly the Clippers, possibly the Suns, right? And they're tied with the Portland Trailblazers right now, and I think it puts them ahead of them. So I think the Nuggets definitely move up in the standings. They move up in the rankings of where I think they'll end up, which is that they'll definitely get to the second round, and they might have a chance at the third round, depending on who their matchup is. If they have to play the Jazz, it's going to be tough. Or if they have to play the Lakers, it's going to be tough if the Lakers are healthy. But, I agree with you. I think this Jazz team is a really, really, really good team. So 2 more things I wanted to ask. I know we're late on this segment, but 2 more things. So 1, the Trailblazers, they add Norman Powell, but they trade Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood for him. Again, it's Damian Lillard, as clutch as it gets. You have CJ McCollum, you have Nurkic. It's a solid team, but what do the Trailblazers need to do to make that next step? Carmelo as well. This is a pretty good team. They got Covington, but why don't we add them in the discussion? Because they are tied with the Nuggets for the 5th seed right now. And why aren't we putting the Trailblazers as high as these other teams like Phoenix and the Jazz and the Clippers?
I think the Blazers, I kind of pair them in that same Clippers category where I think they just have a cap, right? We know how great Damian Lillard is, right? Dame time. The dude is absolutely clutch. You want a bucket in the last couple seconds to win you a ball game. Damian Lillard is one of the first dudes that's going to come to your mind, right? CJ McCollum makes that pairing one of the best duos in the front court the NBA has to offer, right? And then you've got Robert Covington, Joseph Nurkic, right? It's a very good lineup. And obviously, Carmelo Anthony, Enes Kanter, Derrick Jones Jr. coming off the bench. It's a very solid team. I just think over the past 4 or 5 years, we haven't seen Damian Lillard take that next step in the playoffs, right? It's nothing against him specifically, but when you want to be known as that dude, when you want to, Dame time and touch your watch every time and all that stuff, at a certain point, you have to be able to elevate your team in the playoffs when it matters most. And I simply don't think that he has been able to do that. Now, I'm not simply blaming him because obviously it's the pieces around him as well. I just don't know if this team, how it is currently constructed, can go up against the likes of a Lakers or a Utah Jazz or even the Denver Nuggets and in a 7-game series, really beat those teams out. So I think they just have a cap on their ceiling, just like the Clippers do. Clippers can't make it out of the second round, and apparently neither can the Portland Trailblazers. So I like their team. The one thing I will say on Norman Powell, obviously he brings that veteran leadership, winning a championship with the Toronto Raptors a couple of years ago when they had Kawhi Leonard. But I mean, to lose Gary Trent Jr., who is a 3-point specialist and young as well, I think that was big. Rodney Hood, obviously a little bit longer in the tooth. He could shoot the 3 ball as well, more of a long wing defender. I think the combination of Rodney Hood and Gary Trent Jr. almost equals Norman Powell in a sense, right? Yeah. Norman Powell isn't as long as Rodney Hood, but I think he plays equal, just as good as defense as those guys. So to me, that's kind of like a wash. It's like, yeah, you're getting Norman Powell, but you're losing to play. So to me, it's like, I think he can help, but I liked it if they only had to give up Gary Trent Jr. or if they only had to give up Rodney Hood. The fact that the Blazers had to give up both of those guys, to me, was a little too rich for getting Norman Powell is going to have to play lights out, right? Like, and here's the thing: you've already got Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, who are the primary ball handlers, primary scorers. So where is Norman Powell really going to fit in with this team? Not so sure.
Yeah, no, the good thing about the West is there is 6 solid teams here. And then, I'll never doubt Steph Curry and the Warriors if they can get in the playoffs. Because, from what we've seen from them in the playoffs, even before all the, those Warriors dynasty days, was Steph Curry stepping up and like you mentioned, elevating his team to higher ranks than they should have, right? So the West is going to be fun to watch, and especially with 2 seeds like the Suns. There's a lot of stuff we haven't seen before. Jazz are the number 1 seed, right? Will the Lakers be healthy? Or what will the Suns do in the playoffs? Will it all the collapse for the Clippers, right? There's a lot to watch here, and it's going to be exciting. And the good thing was for us content-wise, the NBA trade deadline definitely made a difference this year, and all these signings and buyouts, did something. I don't think anything big enough will happen, soon. So I think this is where we're at, right? This is where we're going to get. We have about 6, 7 teams in the West that might make a run here. Realistically, 5 or 6, not 6 or 7. And then in the East, you have like that 3-headed race between the Nets, who are the top team, and then the Bucks and 76ers. Really, really interesting stuff. But we need to move on. Probably going 115 today, guys, just letting you know, because we have the NFC West to go over right now. Now, the good thing about the NFC West is we don't even need to really go over all the teams, Jared. All these teams are impressive, right? Every single one of these teams either is most likely going to make the playoffs or made a decision this week that's super interesting and that we can talk about. So we're going to talk about that super interesting decision. And that is the San Francisco 49ers trading for the number 3 pick in the NFL draft. I told you guys this is a big show today. Lots to talk about. So we'll start with the trade. We obviously know what this means, and then we'll go over the 49ers, and then we'll go over the Rams, Cardinals, and Seahawks as well. Jared, your first thoughts on the trade, and now hearing John Lynch personally say that they are going to pick a quarterback. What are your thoughts on this whole thing with the 49ers and their quarterback situation?
Bold strategy, Cotton. No, I mean, listen, to me, this just says Jimmy Garoppolo is not our guy. Plain and simple, right? You do not move from the number 12 overall pick to number 3, give up multiple first-round picks. I forget what else they gave up in that. Nick, I'm sure you'll go through that in a minute. But you don't give up that big of a haul to not draft your, potential franchise quarterback for the next 10 years. And if there was ever a year to want to draft a quarterback and make a move, it is this year, right? You've obviously got Trevor Lawrence, who more than likely will go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. We can't say that for certain, but I would say 99% chance that Trevor Lawrence is going to the Jaguars. That leaves you with Zach Wilson. That leaves you with Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, right? I think any of those 4 could potentially go in the top 5 if a team really likes them. And obviously, I think what this does is just signal that GM John Lynch, head coach Kyle Shanahan, don't have the trust in Jimmy Garoppolo to being their long-term guy. Now, that doesn't mean that Jimmy Garoppolo won't be the starting quarterback for them this season, right? He still could be there. Now, I think I was actually just reading an article before we came on this podcast, and apparently the trade, the playbook is open for a potential trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. And if you're Jimmy G, like if I'm him, I'm saying trade me now.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't want to be here, right? Like I know I'm not going to be the long-term guy anymore. Trade me now. If you're the franchise, depending on the player and the potential quarterback that you draft, I think, the best case scenario is to potentially have Jimmy G and then that first round quarterback to potentially sit for a year or at least most of the first season and learn, right? It's not often that you see a guy come in cold turkey like a Justin Herbert, for instance, or an Andrew Luck and just automatically shine, right? It is very far in between. We saw Aaron Rodgers sit for a couple years, right? We've seen guys who are now superstars in this league that sat behind other quarterbacks, learned, and then got to play. So that still could be the thinking, but it's definitely a quarterback. And then I also heard today before I send it off to you is that the 49ers really like Mac Jones, right? The guy who many people have as the 4th or 5th best quarterback in this draft. The 49ers potentially really like Mac Jones. So really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll see what happens. Obviously, you are a Cardinals fan. This is your division. So I will shut up and give the reins to you.
Dude, there's so much interesting stuff about this. First of all, let me explain the deal. So the 49ers acquired the number 3 pick from Miami in exchange for their first round pick, along with 2022 and 2023 first round picks, and a 2022 third round draft pick. Also, the Eagles, I don't know if it was the same deal, but they end up with the 6th pick in this draft, right? Or is it the Dolphins that end up with
so
what happened there?
So there were 2 separate deals. So the first deal was the San Francisco 49ers
that one I just
traded their 12th pick to number 3, and Miami moved from 3 to 12, right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. After that deal was completed and that transaction was done, same day, like Miami must have had both of these deals basically set in stone. Yeah. Same day, Miami then trades their 12th pick that they got from the 49ers to move back up to number 6. That place from the Philadelphia Eagles. So to me, it's interesting that Miami would go from 3 to 12 and now to 6. Like, why would Miami not just do a deal with Philadelphia to go from 3 to 6? I mean, I understand they got a haul from the San Francisco 49ers, but then they must have, and I don't know, I'm sure you can explain this one as well. They must have also had to give up something to the Eagles to go from 12 to 6, right?
I'm looking that up. It's not official apparently yet, so I can look it up in one minute. I'll look it up in a second, so I'll get those details on you on it first. But there's so much interesting. First of all, yes, it doesn't make sense why the Dolphins traded for the 6th pick after they gave away the 3rd pick and got 2 first-round picks along with it, and also got 12th pick, because now there's that question of, like, are they going to pick a quarterback? Like, right? It just confuses an NFL fan like me why they do that. Number 2, the 49ers. Jared, how cutthroat of a league is this? Jared Goff makes the Super Bowl with the Rams against Patriots, gets traded he gets sent to Detroit 2 years later, right?
Bye-bye.
Jared Goff, I believe the Rams made the playoffs, right? The last 2 years? Or did they miss playoff 1 year? Made the other one? Whatever. They made the playoffs last year. Jimmy G, okay, goes to the Super Bowl in 2019. And then, yes, they were injury-riddled. He got hurt himself. And 2 years later, he might not be the starter of that team, and he might not get traded. Oh, this is so interesting. Then you hear this stuff about Mac Jones. I'll say this. The least crazy thing about the news that we've heard with Miami trading for the 6th pick, the 49ers trading for the 3rd pick, and Mac Jones being their top target, the least surprising thing is Mac Jones being the surprise target. You know why that is, Jared? Because Shanahan's playbook is run first. So you don't need one of those quarterbacks that can run, right? You just need a guy that showed when he has good running backs behind him like Najee Harris in college and good wide receivers, he is successful, right? And so I think Mac Jones does actually fit the 49ers better than a lot of these real bad teams that don't have, a roster right now, like the Jaguars and the Jets and some other teams that might be picking early, right? So I actually love Mac Jones going to the 49ers. If I'm the Panthers and I'm these other teams behind these teams, I go, I love that too. I love that you're going to pick Mac Jones because Mac Jones does not fit on certain teams. But Mac Jones, I think, has enough of a skill set to be able to be programmed by Kyle Shanahan to give the ball to Mostert, play action, toss it to Deebo Samuel, toss it to the other wide receivers on this team. Brandon Ayuk, the guy from ASU. There's a lot of interesting things with this trade, but it would not surprise me at all if they pick Mac Jones because that guy fits this system perfectly. What do you think about Mac Jones? Because you just said that they were going to trade for Mac Jones. What are your thoughts on them possibly picking Mac Jones?
I mean, listen, it's just, it's tough because I haven't done like my full research on Mac Jones yet. We saw what he did with Alabama, but the weapons that he had at his disposal at Alabama, I mean, you could have I could have been a first-round draft pick, right? With Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and Najee Harris and that offensive line, right? It's just weapons on weapons on weapons, right? It's just a plethora of guys. So for Mac Jones, like he didn't really need his offensive line because all he had to do was throw quick screens and slants to his receivers, and he let him do the rest. Now, obviously, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. We know that Mac Jones is still a good quarterback, but what I'm saying is Mac Jones good enough to go to a team that maybe doesn't have those same type of weapons, right? Now, if we're specifically talking about the San Francisco 49ers, yes, they have Deebo Samuel, they have Brandon Ayuk, they've got George Kittle, and they've got a good offensive line, right? Can Mac Jones be that same player and continue to progress in an NFL system with maybe not as great of talent? Right? Because when you're drafting a quarterback specifically in the top 5 or in the top 10, or I think really in the first round in general, you're drafting a guy that you can say, all right, maybe our team, doesn't have all the weapons yet. This quarterback can progress to be elite, and he can make up for some of the deficiencies that we have. So to me, my biggest question with Mac Jones is, can he continue to be that guy and look like that guy at Alabama? Or is he going to regress because he doesn't have those weapons anymore? So I think the 49ers have good weapons, but it's just at Alabama, I mean, their third and fourth string guys can go start anywhere. So he just, even when the likes of Jalen Waddle went down, the next receiver just steps in and he's just as good, right? So I like Mac Jones, but for him to be now talked about in the top 3, as opposed to, mid to late first round, which I think is more of his area. Top 3, ahead of a Justin Fields, potentially, ahead of a Zach Wilson, potentially, and even a Trey Lance is shocking. But, after you have your pro day, after you throw and you look good and you get a chance to actually sit down and be evaluated by these teams, who knows? Teams might have a change of heart. They might fall in love with the guy. And I think that's what we're potentially seeing with the 49ers.
Yeah, well, and here's the other thing, too. Garoppolo still has a lot of money that he's left owed, right? He has a big contract.
Actually, just really quick with that, I think the 49ers were really smart when they signed him to that long-term deal. If I'm not mistaken, I'll have to go back and look at this in a second. After this season, I'm pretty sure there's like some type of buyout to where there can be no more guaranteed money for Garoppolo. So yeah, even though we signed like $100-something million contract over 4 or 5 years or whatever it was, really the chunk of the contract was the first 2 to 3 years. So like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they still draft a guy with that number 3 overall pick, but keep Jimmy Garoppolo for 1 more year, and then next year release him or trade him or do whatever they want to do. And it's not like they're having to still pay him like a la Carson Wentz situation, where Carson Wentz is still going to count $33 million against the Philadelphia Eagles salary, and the dude is not going to suit up in a green uniform for Philly, right? So
yeah, what you're saying right there is what I was hoping that the deal was, because realistically, this would make a lot of sense, right? If they would have just said, you know what, we're going to give up on this guy and have all this dead cap money and maybe the quarterback doesn't work out. So with this deal right now, they could save cap money by getting rid of Jimmy Garoppolo, which you should do if he's not going to be the starter, right? Like you shouldn't keep a guy around. And then offensively, Jared, like this is maybe the best offensively they've been, right? Like Raheem Mostert, almost ran for 300 yards in a playoff game against the Green Bay Packers. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, both healthy, very, very good wide receivers, better receivers than normal for the 49ers. They George Kittle, right, in the offense, their best player. And then you lock up Trent Williams for 5 years. They add Alex Mack as their center. Their offensive line overall is solid. And then you have Mac Jones on the rookie contract. This team's scary if Mac Jones works out. It's a risk, but I think they understand, okay, we know what we're going to get from Garoppolo. He's not worth the money we're paying. Might as well go with another Garoppolo 2.0, but pay him $7-8 million a year, right? And not pay him 25 or 27 or whatever he's getting. So I like the deal if they end up getting rid of Garoppolo. If they keep him, it makes really no sense. So I see them drafting a guy like Mac Jones or Trey Lance and Justin Fields and moving on. Right. And it makes a lot of sense now that they can get rid of that Garoppolo contract. So smart move by the 49ers. Does that mean I know what's going to happen next year with their team? No. And I'll say this, they get a lot of injuries back. A lot of guys from injury back, Nick Bosa, plenty of others. They do lose Richard Sherman. But again, they extend Trent Williams. On offense, they brought back they get a lot of good players back from injury, including George Kittle, including Mostert. And on defense, they re-signed a lot of important guys, DJ Jones, Jaquiski Tart, Kawan Williams. They signed Samson Ibukam, right? This team's solid. But at quarterback, we don't know. So in my opinion, they're number 4 in this division until I see how well Mac Jones plays or whoever they draft. I'm not going to sit here and say that Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, and Matthew Stafford are worse than Mac Jones and Jimmy Garoppolo, right? So I'm going to go quarterback-wise. The team still has a lot of questions, it's going to be interesting with that team. Your thoughts on the 49ers? Do you think they're a top team in this division? Or do you think they're the worst?
No. Listen, this division is so good that you get the right quarterback with Kyle Shanahan, who is a team friendly quarterback guy, right? He's not going to put his quarterback, whether it's a veteran or a rookie, into many harmful mistake decision-wise, right? He's going to give him easy throws, bootlegs. They're going to lean heavily on their run. You talked about their offensive line. So you're right. Whether it's Jimmy or a rookie, they're not better than any of the other 3 quarterbacks that are in the NFC West. So for that purpose, I will put them at number 4 for right now. But as we've seen, you never know. 2 years ago, the 49ers go to the Super Bowl. Last year, they end up as the worst team in that division, right? So every year, we talk about it, there is more parity in the NFL than almost any other major sports league. And you just don't know, right? But as of right now, if you're asking me, yes, I will put the 49ers at number 4, sitting last in the NFC West.
Well, I'll say this too. The 49ers, with a full roster, lost to the Cardinals on game 1 last year. So, this team, although, you can say injuries hindered them. Maybe they were going to be the top team. You still lost to the Cardinals week 1. We ended up as an 8-8 team, right? Yeah, we did lose Chandler Jones, right, during the season. And Kyler got hurt a couple games and stuff like that and got hurt in that last game. But Niners still were probably going to be middle of the pack average and probably barely make the playoffs, even if it did. And then they'd get smoked by whoever the 2 seed was last year, right? So I think this team is still down in the dumps because of their quarterback situation. And I don't think the injury guys coming back is going to make that big of a difference. All right, Jay, this may surprise you or it may not surprise you. My 3rd team in the NFC West is the Seattle Seahawks, okay? And I'll explain to you why, okay? Their biggest...
Please do.
I'll say this. They might have been the worst team, obviously, if they traded Russell Wilson. And if they didn't bring a guy like Carlos Dunlap back. Because Carlos Dunlap made a big difference on that defense last year. They were the worst defense in the NFL, and they got to like the mid-20s just by adding a guy like that. So keeping Russell Wilson, obviously, and then getting back Carlos Dunlap on defense, big moves by the Seahawks, and they will be solid. They do add Gabe Jackson, a lineman. They add a couple other linemen. They bring back a solid offensive line. You could maybe even say they got a little better, right? It will be a top 15 offensive line. It'll be a top NFL, offensive line as far as, top 16, right? They do lose, let me see, I'm looking at the Cardinals right now. They do lose Shaquille Griffin at corner. They already lost Richard Sherman 2 years ago, right? They lose a couple receiving assets in David Moore or Dorsett, and then they just lost Jaron Reed on an already not very good defensive line. So I just don't see how this team's better, and I think they were a little more overrated than their record. Yes, they have Russell Wilson, who can win any game at any time. I just think, Jared, like, there's enough of the Russell Wilson sprinting around for his life. I just don't think he can do it every single year out, and be able to have a 12-4, 13-3 team in this division that I think is going to get better. Like, the 49ers are going to be better, right? Or at least the same. And the Rams got better, in my opinion, and the Cardinals definitely got better. I just don't see how the Seahawks are going to end up any better than 11-5. And I think it might be a little worse, 10-6, 9-7. I just don't think they added enough to supplant what they lose, in key positions like Jaron Reed and Shaquille Griffin on defense. I just don't think signing back Dunlap is enough to make them like a quality playoff team. Do I think they can be 6 or 7 seed? Yes. But this team, I just think, regressed a little bit this year.
When you're talking about this team and the weapons that they have offensively and defensively, yes, I can get on board. I agree with you. Is it enough to win the division, or even get in as a wild card? Probably not. I can't say for certain yes or no, but I'm definitely not like 100% stamp on it, ink it, put it in pen. But Russell Wilson is Russell Wilson, man. I mean, like, there's a reason they call him Dangerous, right? Like, there's a reason why he gets paid all that money, and why he is so great. It's because he does so much with not a whole lot. Like, no offense, DK Metcalf is an animal. He's a beast. Tyler Lockett, he obviously has a great rapport with him. So those are two good receivers that have been in the system and know it very well. But like you mentioned, their offensive line, I think, has gotten better. I think that's been the main issue for the Seahawks, at least offensively, is the fact that Russell Wilson hasn't had the time in his pocket, right? He's had to basically move outside and create his own plays. It's not many times where the Seahawks line up and actually run and convert the play that was called in the huddle. Many times it turns into street ball, right? Or like, backyard football, where Russell Wilson is literally running for his life, like you mentioned, and he's having to make something out of nothing. So they've had Dwayne Brown now for I believe he's going on his 3rd year, left tackle to anchor Russell Wilson's blind side. And then you're right, they're bringing in Gabe Jackson, who's a very solid right guard for this team. So I think this offensive line is improving. I hope that they do more in the draft. If they can add another piece or so in the draft, plus to protect Russell Wilson a little bit more with the weapons that they already have, I mean, I put them right there with. I think they could go anywhere from 3 to 1. Right? I mean, yeah, they could be at number 3 because their defense, I don't think, is going to be as good with the losses of Griffin and Jaron Reed. But if Russell Wilson has an MVP type season, I can see this team being number 1 in the West. So I think it really all comes down to the protection of Russell Wilson, keeping him healthy, and just letting him do his thing. Now, I want to say something really quick on Jaron Reed, because to me, that was probably one of the dumbest moves I've seen the Seahawks make in a very long time. Jaron Reed is 28 years old, in the prime of his career, and Seattle cut him because supposedly they were paying him too much money. I'm sorry, but I'm not saying he's Aaron Donald, right? But when you have a disrupting force at your defensive tackle spot that can not only stop the run and play the run, you can find those guys there a dime a dozen. But when you can find a disruptive force that can get pressure up the middle on a quarterback, those are rare, right? You do not find those, just on the street corner, right? We've seen in Super Bowls before where Tom Brady has gotten flustered with pressure up the middle. Remember the New York Giants, right? And they did not have the likes of a Jaron Reed up the middle. But when you pressure a quarterback, I don't care if it is Tom Brady or Lamar Jackson or anyone else, up the middle, and they can't step up in the pocket, that is a recipe for disaster for the offense. And that is exactly what Jarran Reed was doing for the Seattle defense. Now you went to Kansas City and you just paired Jarran Reed with Chris Jones, who is arguably one of the best defensive tackles right next to Aaron Donald. So to me, from a defensive standpoint, you already lose one of your best corners in Griffin, and then you lose, no doubt, your best defensive lineman in Jarran Reed simply because the Seahawks thought they were paying him too much money. That one does make zero sense to me. If I'm Russell Wilson, I'm upset, right? There's already been rumors that Russell Wilson, has had a little bit of a shaky relationship this past offseason with the organization, wanting to be more involved in the decision making. Not saying he wants to be the guy. Obviously, he's not the GM, he's not the coach, he's not the owner. But when you are the face of the franchise, I think you would expect in today's football to have some kind of input, right? And I think this is exactly it. Part of the reason why Russell Wilson is frustrated, because Seattle is, in a sense, giving it. They didn't even trade Jarran Reed.
Yeah,
they straight up simply released him. They didn't get any compensation for, like I said, one of the best defensive tackles in the league in his prime at 28 years old. You just straight up release him. No compensation, no draft picks, no players in return. So to me, if I'm Russell Wilson, I'm going to the Seattle front office and I'm saying, what are you guys doing, man? Like, at least get some compensation back for this guy. It's not like he's washed up and he's 34, 28 years old, prime of his career, and you get nothing for him. I don't know what Seattle's doing.
Yeah, well, and this is what I'm saying. Again, you keep Russell Wilson, which will always keep you in playoff contention and potentially Super Bowl contention. But with this team, I just think they got slightly worse, right? They lose Reed and Griffin, and they get back Dunlap, but that's a loss, right? You lost. You didn't win. You got worse, right? And then offensively, they stay the same. They improve their offensive line a bit, but it's not like that offensive line is a juggernaut. Like I was saying, I think they were like 14th or 15th last year. And a lot of times it didn't look like that when you were watching games, right? Like it looked like it was a lot worse than that. The Cardinals were running in there without even Chandler Jones during that overtime game. Okay, so, I just think this team got a little bit worse. Now, when you look at who I'm going to say second, I'm going to say the Cardinals second. Jared, I'm not saying the Cardinals are first place. You can give a sigh of relief there. That I'm not going to embarrass myself.
I'm a little surprised. But I'll take it.
But I'll explain to you why I think the Cardinals are better than the 49ers and Seahawks, because this team got better in a lot of their key positions of need, right? Obviously, I think Kyler in year 3. Already a little bit better. Hey, we'll give you A.J. Green. Hopefully Larry comes back, right? You still have DeAndre Hopkins. So offensively, skill positions, they got better, right? You look at running back. They lost Kenyon Drake, but Chase Edmonds, to a lot of Cardinals fans and even our GM, he was the better option anyway. So I don't think that was a downgrade at all. It might even be an upgrade, right? The depth at running back is a little sketchy, but whatever. You hope that your guy doesn't get hurt. You look at defense. You look at defense. They lose Patrick Peterson, which everyone was saying was a big deal. And they signed Malcolm Butler for a year. Malcolm Butler had better stats than Patrick Peterson did last year. I wouldn't say that Patrick Peterson is worse than Malcolm Butler, but I'll say this, for the cost of what Patrick Peterson was, this is a really good move for the Cardinals. And it's, it helps on defense. Jared, you're shaking your head, so I'll turn it to you, because this is the first time you've totally disagreed with me on this podcast so far. So what's this deal? Look at the stats, Jared. Malcolm Butler had a better year.
Shame on you. Shame on you for turning your back on Patrick Peterson, who has been nothing but loyal to that Arizona Cardinals team for his entire career. You want to bring up stats for 1 year and say that Malcolm Butler had one better year than Patrick Peterson. Do you know what those stats were? Like, in what areas, in what categories did Malcolm Butler do better than Patrick Peterson? Because if you tell me that it was tackling or like assisted tackling or something like that, I'm simply going to tell you that's because teams throw at Malcolm Butler. They are not afraid that he is going to pick the ball off and do something with it, right? Patrick Peterson may not have the stats. I get it. He may not be in the prime of his career. He's not the top dog, number 5 overall pick that he was back in the day. But I think the dude can still ball, right? Well, the fact that he went to Minnesota is a whole nother story, and that's a different subject. Patrick Peterson doesn't get the ball thrown to him nearly as much as Malcolm Butler because Patrick Peterson actually guards his receivers, right? Yes, I get it. Malcolm Butler had that great interception in the Super Bowl, made a huge name for himself, got himself a lot of money with the Patriots and then with the Tennessee Titans. Good for him. I'm all for players getting their money. But to sit here as an Arizona Cardinals fan and today to say that Malcolm Butler is better than Patrick Peterson, you're on crack. You're smoking something. There is no way that I will ever say that Malcolm Butler is better than Patrick Peterson. That, to me, that's blasphemy. You sound like Ryan Johnson right now. You just said some blasphemy. You've been hanging out with Ryan Johnson way too damn long. That's what's happening. He must be in your ear right now, because that is that. I'm. Go ahead.
Jared, you're burying the lead. You're burying the lead. I'm not saying that overall Malcolm Butler is a better player than Patrick Peterson. I'm saying
it's an upgrade. You said it was an upgrade.
Listen, I'm saying it quite possibly could be an upgrade. Again, Malcolm Butler.
Okay.
Well, let me explain.
Let's throw in the quite possibly.
Let me explain myself, and it's going to sound a lot like my Clippers argument. First of all, just to let you know, but Malcolm Butler, okay. Yes, he had 100 tackles last year. Okay, that's impressive. 7 interceptions.
Impressive?
Right? Impressive. It's impressive.
Because receivers catch balls on him and he has to tackle them. That's
not
impressive.
No, Darren, it's because the Titans defense was trash last year. Someone had to make a tackle, and it was Malcolm Butler most of the time, okay?
Malcolm Butler was a part of the trash.
No, okay. According to a lot of people, Malcolm Butler was their best defender last year. I'm just saying.
According to a lot of people. Woo, man, listen, this is one of the weakest arguments you have had in the Cover 2 podcast. I don't say that a lot because I love and respect you, and I still do. Yeah. You're not having a good argument. You haven't let me finish. Okay. You got me all worked up now. I don't even know what I was saying. I'll shut up.
So Malcolm Butler, right? His stats are there as core. Okay, it's a better upgrade than Robert Alford and Byron Murphy, who Byron Murphy's a slot corner. He's not an outside corner. The Cardinals needed to do something. They couldn't afford Patrick Peterson, so they went after Malcolm Butler. All I'm saying is, for the morale of fans, a lot of Cardinals fans noticed Patrick Peterson was slipping up the last 2 years. There was a lot of big-time plays. If you remember, where nobody remembers, because of what happened in this game, Patrick Peterson completely blew the game against the Bills. And then got lucky that Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins made that fantastic Hail Mary. But 28 seconds before that, Patrick Peterson got burned by Stephon Diggs. In a lot of games last year against top wide receivers, Patrick Peterson didn't play well against the top wide receivers, or they moved away from him and played, off of him, right? And it didn't help the Cardinals' the defense. So I'm not saying that Patrick Peterson is a better player than Malcolm Butler. I'm not even saying he's an upgrade, but I'm saying for a lot of people, after that 6-game suspension and after the way he's played in some of the top games, I think we're all okay with Patrick Peterson not being our corner this year, and we're okay with a guy like Malcolm Butler, who's had the career playoff highlights, who's had solid years in Tennessee, to be that number one corner for us. Will it work out like Patrick Peterson did? Probably not, because Patrick Peterson was one of the best corners in the NFL, if not the best corner for a couple of years. But it's a good fix. And in some ways, Malcolm Butler had a better year last year than Patrick Peterson. I'm not saying every other year than that Patrick Peterson played worse than him. But last year, it's interesting that Butler's stats were that high, and he did lead a Titans defense that was not very good. He was their best player. That's all I'm saying.
I'm marking down this time, because when the season starts, come to me week 4 of the season and tell me if you're still okay.
I will be.
Butler
I will be.
Corner.
Okay, let me explain the rest of my Cardinals argument here, okay? Because we're burying the lead, right? They get Malcolm Butler. So now their corner position is somewhat filled, right? All they really need to do is go and draft the second corner. And the corners are solid, right? Robert Alford, Malcolm Butler, Byron Murphy, and a top draft pick, first or second rounder. It's pretty good, right, Jared? Solid corner job for a team that just lost Patrick Peterson, right? We upgrade with J.J. Watt, right? We get Chandler Jones back. We get Marcus Golden back.
That's an upgrade.
Yeah, I'm just saying. So all of it's an upgrade, right? We exchange kickers. Matt Prater is a better kicker than all our kickers last year were, okay? And so, again, this team improved wholly. They improved on defense, and they improved on offense. So that's why I have them second. The Rams, they had the number one defense last year. They do lose a lot, though. They lose John Johnson. They lose Troy Hill. They lose Ibukam. They do get Leonard Floyd, but I know, Jared, you're not as high on Leonard Floyd, and especially that contract he got. You don't think that's worth it. But they still have Jalen Ramsey. They still have Aaron Donald. They improve at the quarterback position. They didn't lose any of their receiving assets, and they didn't lose their top running backs. So for me, I can't sit here and say that the Rams are worse than they were last year. I think they got a little bit better. So I have the Rams number 1, the Cardinals at number 2, the Seahawks at number 3. Cardinals and Seahawks close, by the way, too. And the 49ers at clear number 4.
Yeah, I going with the Rams because I think we've talked about the Cardinals enough on this show today. I can't disagree with you about the Rams being the number 1, or at least going into the season as the favorite to win that division. And it's simply because of Matthew Stafford. If Matthew Stafford was on this Rams team last year, or even 2 years ago when the Rams made it to the Super Bowl, 3 years ago, I think the Rams win that Super Bowl, right? I'm sorry to say, but Jared Goff was the reason what held this team back, right? Listen, Sean McVay did everything he could with the motions. I believe the Rams were the number 1 team in the NFL in pre-snap motion, right? Sean McVay was in Jared Goff's ear for 15 seconds, the most allotted time you're allowed to be until your headset gets cut off, right? At a certain point before the clock expires, the play clock, you no longer can have communication with your head coach or coordinator or anything like that. Sean McVay was literally teaching Jared Goff on the field, kind of telling him what to do, right? You're not going to have to do that with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford has been in the league long enough, seen every type of defense there is. And I think because he was in Detroit, he just was not able to, I don't want to say not show his true talent. He just never had the weapons that he will now have with the Rams. So, yes, with that Rams offense, along with the fact, like you said, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald, Leonard Floyd, who I like, I just don't like his contract necessarily. But this Rams defense was legit. They finished last year number 1 and a total overall defense. So, yeah, I'm putting the Rams at number 1 right now. And then realistically, it's a race for 2, 3, and 4. I'll more likely agree with you that I think the 49ers are number 4, but 2 and 3 with Seattle and Arizona, I think we could probably argue about.
Yeah, no, and again, it's going to be close. And the Cardinals have a tendency to beat the Seahawks at least once every single year, too. So that we'll be looking at the end of the season to likely see that. I just see that the upgrades the Cardinals made. I forgot to mention that they made upgrades on the offensive line, and it was already a number 12 offensive line. So the Cardinals now jump into a top 10 offensive line. The Rams had the number 3 offensive line last year. It's not going to be worse than top 10, and their defense won't be worse than top 10, even with the loss of the additions of John Johnson and Troy Hill and Ibukam and people like that. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I'll say this again. If the 49ers and the Seahawks and the Cardinals and the Rams were in any other division, we'd be probably calling them all playoff teams. And they still might all make the playoffs in the NFC West. Again, last year, if the Cardinals would have had Kyler Murray playing, we would have seen 3 NFC West teams in the playoffs, right? And with one other spot available. And if the 49ers would have been healthy, they might have made the playoffs too. So it can happen. The NFC is not as much of a juggernaut as it was a couple years ago. So it's possible for one entire division to make it. But this division should be really interesting. Jared, any last thoughts on the NFC West before you go, or should we end this thing?
No, listen, it's going to be one of the most competitive divisions in all of football. And like we've said, yeah, we think the Rams are going to be first, but it's not definitive. We're I don't know, we're not talking about a division where there's 1 or 2 good teams and the other 2 teams suck. So this really comes down to how healthy can a team stay. And I think the healthiest team will eventually win this division. I think plain and simple. All 4 of these teams realistically could.
That's a very good point. Yeah, health will be a big factor. It obviously affected the 49ers, and quarterback health even more. Will really be the top of this division. All right, that's it. Next week or even later this week, we will have an MLB preview for you. The MLB season starts on Thursday. This podcast should be released Tuesday at the latest. And so we'll have that coming for you, and then possibly another podcast next week. But we will definitely have an MLB preview coming up next for you, and possibly a special guest on that podcast as well. So, but for this podcast, we are done. Once again, I am Nick Nenad.
And I'm Jared Smith.
And we will see you guys next week.